Somewhere in a storage facility, a cardboard box sat on a shelf for 20 years. Nobody opened it. Inside those boxes were magnetic data tapes. On those tapes were games the world had long forgotten existed. To understand what was inside those tapes, you have to go back to a very specific moment in time. It is 1994. The internet exists, but most homes cannot access it. Dial-up modems are slow, expensive, and unreliable. Downloading a single image can take minutes. The idea of streaming a video game directly into a living room television feels like science fiction, and yet one company decided to try. The idea was deceptively simple. Every home with cable television already had a coaxial wire running through the wall. That wire carried dozens of channels simultaneously. Why not use one of those channels to carry data, not video, not audio, pure binary code, the kind that makes a game run? The infrastructure already existed. It was already paid for. All that was needed was the right adapter and a willing audience. A small cartridge adapter plugged into the console's cartridge slot contained no game of its own. It was in every meaningful sense a receiver. The cable signal came in through the back of the television, passed through the adapter, and was decoded into live game data. Subscribers could select any title from a rotating monthly library and begin playing within seconds. No disc, no cartridge, no trip to the store. Every night the signal went to thousands of living rooms. Most subscribers never thought about what was carrying it. At the broadcast centre, a small team managed the library like a radio station manages its playlist. Every month the schedule changed. New titles rotated in, older ones rotated out. The system broadcast continuously, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, sending game code down the wire whether anyone was home to receive it or not. It was, in the truest sense, live television for games. The library grew to hundreds of titles. But what made the service unusual was the content that existed only within it. Certain games were developed specifically for this platform and released nowhere else. No cartridge version was ever manufactured. No retail box ever appeared on a store shelf. If you had not subscribed during those 4 years, you had simply never seen these games. They existed in a distribution universe most people never knew about. There were also prototypes. Games submitted for inclusion in the rotating library that were approved and broadcast but never completed enough to sell at retail. Some were polished enough that players could finish them. Others had rough edges that would never be sanded down. They lived briefly in that cable signal, reached a small subscriber base, and then evaporated when the service went dark. For years, nobody was entirely sure they had been real at all. Technically, the delivery system was an extraordinary achievement for its time. The cable company compressed game data into a segment of bandwidth that would otherwise carry a television channel. The game loaded into the console's RAM in real time from the incoming stream. There was no storage on the subscriber's end. The moment the cable was unplugged, the game was gone. It left no trace in the home. It existed only while the signal existed. In 1994, data moved through cable lines at a speed that felt impossibly fast. Nothing else came close. The download speed was approximately 1 megabyte per minute. The full game could take 4 to 12 minutes to load before play could begin. Players sat in front of a loading screen and waited. By today's standards, this sounds excruciating. By the standards of 1994, it was astonishing. The alternative was a drive to a rental store, followed by rewinding. Waiting 10 minutes at home felt like a revolution. The service also broadcast additional content beyond games. Game tips appeared in a dedicated section. Demo versions were offered. Contests ran through the platform. At its best, the service felt like a living thing. Curated, maintained, responsive. The people who worked there describe it with warmth. They were building something they believed in, something genuinely new in a small window of time when that kind of newness was still possible. At its peak, the service had hundreds of thousands of subscribers across the United States. It was profitable, it was growing. There were plans for an expanded version aimed at personal computers, not consoles. Internal documentation later recovered shows proposals for a successor system that would have brought cable game delivery to home computers years before broadband internet made the same thing possible. The blueprints were drawn. The ambitions were real. None of those plans came to be. By 1997, something new had arrived in American homes that the service's founders had not anticipated at sufficient scale. The internet, the real internet, the kind accessible from a home telephone line, was spreading faster than any subscription cable service could match. Games could now be patched, discussed, and theoretically downloaded over a phone connection. The cable service's core advantage, speed, was about to disappear. The service shut down in the summer of 1998. The signal went out at midnight. Nobody broadcast a farewell. The hardware was decommissioned. The broadcast equipment was sold or scrapped. The adapter units were left in drawers and eventually thrown away. Within a year, most of the physical infrastructure had been dismantled. What remained were memories, a handful of magazine articles, and a thin scattering of forum posts from former subscribers wondering aloud whether anyone else remembered the thing they had once used. The exclusive games, the ones that had only ever existed on the cable broadcast, were effectively gone. You could not find them in any archive. They had never been converted to the formats collectors traded and preserved. The few who had played them could describe them. Screenshots appeared occasionally in old magazine scans. But the actual code, the thing itself, had vanished as cleanly as if it had never been written. This is not unusual. It is what happens to most digital things, the assumption that digital files are permanent, that because something can be copied infinitely it will be, is one of the most consequential misconceptions of our time. Digital preservation requires active, ongoing effort. Files degrade with their storage media. Formats become unreadable as the software to open them disappears. The digital world forgets quickly and quietly. Archivists have a name for this phenomenon. They call it the digital dark age. Unlike physical objects, which degrade slowly and visibly, the fading of ink, the crumbling of paper, the rust of metal, digital objects can fail completely and without warning. One day they open, the next day they do not, and because digital decay is invisible until the moment of failure, there is often no chance to intervene. By the time anyone notices, nothing remains. Nearly half the web as it existed in 2013 is now gone. Most of it left no trace at all. The cable game service's exclusive library fell into this same silence. For years, the community of digital preservationists treated its exclusives as a special category of loss. You could confirm they had existed. Magazine listings, subscriber recollections, release schedules partially referenced in unrelated court documents. But confirmation was not recovery. The games themselves remained inaccessible, possibly gone entirely. The recovery project began with a message. Someone who had worked on the service, an original staff member from the 1990s, was contacted by an archivist documenting the platform's history. The staff member still had materials, documents, and more significantly tapes, professional archival tape formats used for broadcast mastering, dense, capable of holding enormous quantities of data, the kind that does not fail quickly. The recovery project began with a message. Someone who had worked on the service, an original staff member from the 1990s, was contacted by an archivist documenting the platform's history. The staff member still had materials, documents, and more significantly, tapes. Professional archival tape formats, the kind used for broadcast mastering. Large, dense, capable of holding enormous quantities of data, the kind that does not fail quickly. The archivist travelled to meet the former staff member. The collection was larger than expected. Not a few tapes. Many. Each one covered a different period of the service's operation, different months, different broadcast windows, different rotating libraries. Full operational history of the service, nearly every piece of software it had ever carried, might be sitting in those cases. It would take a great deal of work to find out. But it might all be there. Reading those tapes required equipment that barely exists anymore. Professional tape formats from the 1990s use proprietary RID heads that consumer players cannot access. To extract the data, you need the original machine, one of the very few still capable of reading the format. These devices are no longer manufactured. They appear occasionally at auctions or the back rooms of broadcast facilities not yet cleared out. Each working unit is irreplaceable. The machine was located, shipped across the country, set up in a borrowed workspace. Then the real work began. Every tape had to be inspected first. Magnetic tape from the 1990s can suffer from a condition called sticky shed syndrome. The binder holding magnetic particles to the tape base breaks down, leaving a residue that makes it stick to the reed head. The remedy is to bake the tapes at a precise temperature for a precise duration, restoring the binder temporarily for one clean read. Each tape gets one chance. The data from the tapes was not immediately usable. The cable service's encoding scheme was proprietary, invented specifically for this platform and not documented in any public standard. The team had to reverse engineer the format from first principles, analysing the raw binary output and working backwards towards something recognisable as game code. This took months. The tapes held data, but the key to reading it had to be rebuilt from scratch. This kind of work sits at the intersection of archaeology and engineering. There is no guidebook. The people doing it are enthusiasts, often working evenings and weekends, communicating through forums, and assembling a picture of a technical system from its residue. The knowledge they need lives in the memories of people who built the original system. Those people are getting older. The window for reaching them is closing. The team tracked down additional former employees. A software engineer who had worked on the compression system still had personal notes from his time on the project. Handwritten, stored in a folder he had not opened in over 15 years. A hardware technician remembered the specific encoding decisions they had made to maximize data throughput within the cable channel's bandwidth. Each conversation added a piece. Slowly, the format became legible. After 2 years, the decoder was ready. They loaded the first tape. The game code came through clean and complete. One by one, the tapes yielded their contents. Standard library titles came first. Games already preserved elsewhere, confirming the decoder worked. Then came the others, the exclusives, the prototypes, game titles that appeared in old magazine listings and nowhere else, now loading into an emulator for the first time in nearly 30 years. The team would describe those first successful reads with great restraint. It was, they said, very good. Among the recovered titles were games believed by the preservation community to be permanently gone. An animated comedy game based on a cartoon cat, featuring levels that had been cut from its retail release and repurposed as cable-exclusive content, never seen by most players. A prehistoric adventure game that had existed only in the cable library and in the memories of a handful of former subscribers. Each one loaded, each one was playable, each one was real. The prototypes were a different kind of discovery. These were games that had never been finished, code that stopped partway through a level, placeholder graphics in sections the developer had not yet polished, menu screens leading to content that did not exist, but they were playable up to the point where the work had stopped. Windows into the development process and the abandoned directions that normally vanish when a project is cancelled. Among the most unexpected finds was a project never announced publicly. The cable service had contracted a developer to build a web browser for the 16-bit console using the cable connection as its internet link. The project was cancelled before completion, but a version survived on the tapes. Incomplete. It loaded, and it opened on hardware designed in 1988, a page from the early internet. A web browser on a 16-bit console that had never shipped, found on a tape in a storage box. The recovery project also uncovered internal documents, contracts, marketing plans, a detailed specification for the successor service intended for personal computers, one that never moved past the planning stage. These were not game files, but equally significant as historical artifacts, evidence of what had been imagined, what had been attempted, and what the people running the service believed the future of digital entertainment would look like. The total recovery came to over 140 separate software items, exclusive titles, variant builds, prototypes, and the incomplete browser. The team's assessment, after 2 years of work, was that their archive contained a near-complete digital record of everything the service had ever distributed. One of the most obscure chapters in the history of video game delivery, nearly erased, had been pulled back from the edge of oblivion. But the cable game service is only one story within a much larger crisis. Vast quantities of early computer software remain unarchived. Source code for foundational programs written in the 1970s and 1980s has been lost. Educational software that ran on school computers throughout the 1980s. Software that shaped how a generation learned to use technology is largely gone. The scale of the digital dark age is difficult to fully comprehend. Floppy disks are sitting in attics right now that no working drive can read. Their content may already be gone. The problem is not limited to games. Academic research from the earliest decades of computing is at risk. Scientific datasets from the 1970s, stored on magnetic tape in formats no current machine can read, hold climate records and experimental findings that have never been replicated. A team at a university spent 2 years building a custom reader to access a single dataset from 1971. The data was intact. Getting to it required inventing new tools. Floppy disks present their own challenges. The drives are no longer manufactured. The ones that survive are held together by aging rubber belts and spindle motors that fail unpredictably. A community of volunteer engineers maintains these drives, servicing, repairing, fabricating replacement parts. They call themselves archivists, but the work is closer to emergency medicine, keeping equipment alive long enough for one last read. Some formats are considered effectively unrecoverable. Certain early storage systems use proprietary encoding that was never publicly documented and whose creators are no longer alive. Without someone who worked on the original system, the data cannot be interpreted even if the physical media survives. It is the equivalent of finding a document written in a language with no living speakers. The words are present. Their meaning is permanently out of reach. The internet itself suffers the same problem. Web pages that existed in 2000 are overwhelmingly gone. Many were never archived. Web archiving did not begin until the mid-1990s, meaning the first 5 years of the public web were almost entirely unrecorded. The pages that launched the commercial internet, the first online stores, the first personal home pages, are lost. We know they happened. We cannot read them. Volunteer archivists are working against a quiet countdown. The people who remember how these systems worked are getting older. Some institutions have begun taking the problem seriously. Digital preservation labs at universities have acquired aging hardware. Early computers, proprietary workstations, obsolete tape drives, and set about systematically reading their contents before the machines fail. The work is painstaking and expensive. A single tape from the 1970s can require weeks of preparation to read, but the alternative is permanent loss, and that cost is also permanent. Emulation has become one of the most powerful tools in the preservationist kit, rather than relying on original hardware. Scarce, fragile, increasingly unreliable. Emulation recreates the original system in software, allowing old programs to run on modern machines. A game written for a 1980s home computer can, with a well-built emulator, run on any current laptop. For many purposes, that is enough. The Cable Game Service's recovered library has been made available in formats compatible with standard emulators. For the first time since 1998, anyone can play the games that had only ever existed in that cable broadcast. The prototypes are available too, incomplete, sometimes baffling, but real. The full archive now exists in a distributed network of preservation servers, backed up across multiple locations. The Phantom Library is no longer phantom. What the archive revealed goes beyond the games. The internal documents showed a company aware by 1997 that the internet was going to end what they were doing. They had 18 months of warning. They used that time not to wind down but to plan a future. The successor system, the expansion. They believed the service could evolve faster than the internet could overtake it. They were wrong, but only barely. The margin was smaller than it looks from here. The people who built the cable game service were not small-scale tinkerers. They were engineers who believed they were building the future of entertainment distribution, the model they created. A central library distributed wirelessly, updated continuously, is structurally identical to the cloud gaming services that appeared 25 years later. They got there first. They just could not sustain the infrastructure long enough to be remembered for it. Every technology the future took for granted was once a cable in someone's living room nobody thought to preserve. There are other services like this one. Platforms that launched in the 1980s and 1990s, attracted real audiences, created real content, and then closed before anyone thought to archive them. Online services that predated the public internet ran interactive fiction, early games, live chat, and digital magazines. When those networks shut down, the content went with them. Volunteers have recovered fragments. Full archives remain almost entirely absent. Early online games suffered the same fate on a larger scale. Games requiring a live server became permanently unplayable the moment those servers went offline. Hundreds of online games from the late 1990s and 2000s, games with dedicated communities and years of player-generated history, simply stopped when companies could no longer maintain the infrastructure. The players' characters, their items, all of it gone, not degraded. Gone. Some of those games have been rebuilt by communities, reconstructed servers created from reverse-engineered client software. These reconstructions are labours of love and technical skill. They're also legally precarious. The rights to the software still exist somewhere, held by a company that may no longer publish games and may or may not know that a community of volunteers is maintaining something they abandoned. The cable game archive avoids this complication in part. The hardware it ran on is no longer commercially relevant. The games were created under contracts that, in most cases, reverted rights to original developers when the service closed. Many of those developers are small enough that enforcing anything seems unlikely. The archive occupies a practical grey zone that has, so far, allowed it to exist openly and be studied by anyone interested. Legal ambiguity follows digital archaeology everywhere. The work happens in the gap between what law says and what anyone enforces. The Cable Game Service Recovery Project has inspired similar efforts aimed at other platforms from the same era. A group working on an early online subscription service from the 1980s recently located a former employee whose personal archive of disk images represents the most complete record of that platform ever assembled. The model is becoming a methodology. Find the people who were there, before they are no longer reachable, and ask what they kept. People kept is often surprising. The impulse to hold on to a disk rather than throw it away turns out to be one of the most consequential forces in digital preservation. Not institutional decision-making, not professional archival practice, but individual sentiment. Someone thought it might matter someday. Someone put it in a box and moved house 3 times over 20 years and still did not throw it away. The recovered archive is now part of an ongoing research project on the early history of digital game distribution. Scholars have found the internal documents as valuable as the software itself. The assumptions embedded in those strategy documents, about how fast home internet would grow, whether cable could compete, are a detailed record of how people in 1996 thought about a future that had not yet happened. That record matters because technology history tends to flatten complexity into inevitability. In retrospect, it appears obvious the internet was going to win. But in 1995, 1996, 1997, it was not obvious. There were multiple plausible futures. The cable game service was betting on one of them. It was not an unreasonable bet, it simply lost. Understanding that the loss was contingent, not inevitable, changes how we think about the world we ended up with. There are other phantom libraries still out there. Games, databases and documents that exist on tapes in boxes in storage rooms. Or that no longer exist, the tapes thrown away by someone who did not know what they were discarding. The cable game service was lucky. The right tape survived. The right archivist found the right former employee at the right time. A small shift in any direction and the library would have been truly gone. The digital record of the 20th century will never be complete, but pieces of it are still recoverable. The people who do this work operate in a kind of parallel quiet. Not academics mostly, not funded by institutions. They are people who found a thing worth saving and decided to save it. The Cable Game Service archive was recovered by a small group who communicated online, pooled their skills, and spent 2 years on a problem most of the world did not know existed. Something about to be forgotten is now preserved. Permanently in this context means as permanently as anything digital ever is. The archive exists on multiple servers with redundant copies held by different individuals and institutions. The chance that all copies fail simultaneously is small, but small is not zero, and the digital world has a history of surprising careful archivists with its capacity for quiet, total loss. The work of preservation is never finished. It is only more or less done. There is something worth sitting with in the image of that cardboard box on the shelf. 2 decades. No one opened it. The service it documented was gone. The company was gone. The console it ran on had been 2 generations obsolete before the box was packed. And yet there it sat, the code preserved on magnetic particles, slowly surviving, waiting for someone to remember it had existed, waiting for someone to go looking. The game that exists only in memory is different from the game that can be played. One is a story. The other is a thing. The Cable Game Service's exclusives existed for years only in the memories of former subscribers. Now they are things again. They can be loaded, completed, and studied by anyone who wants to understand what they were. That transition, from memory to object, is what digital archaeology actually does. History is vanishing around you right now. Most digital things you use today will be unreadable within a generation. The Cable Game Service ran for 4 years. It reached hundreds of thousands of homes. It created real content and real excitement. Then the signal stopped, and it was as if it had never been. The internet continued. The consoles continued. A generation of players grew up and found almost no record of what that service had been. The Phantom Library had become genuinely phantom, until 2 people started pulling tape cases from a cardboard box. If you want to know what other phantom libraries are sitting in boxes waiting to be found, the honest answer is that nobody knows. There is no comprehensive inventory of unarchived digital history. There is only the work of people who care enough to look, reaching out to others who remember, discovering that the box is still on the shelf and the tapes are still readable. This is how it has always been done. The next time you close an app or lose track of a website you used to visit, consider what it would mean for that thing to be completely gone. Not inaccessible. Not offline temporarily. Gone the way things were gone before the printing press. Irretrievable. The digital world erases itself more completely and quietly than any previous medium. The only defense is to notice, to care, and to go looking before the tapes decompose. Somewhere right now, the tape is degrading past the point of recovery. When it crosses that line, the story ends. The Cable Game Service is recovered now. The Phantom Library exists. What it contains is available to anyone who wants to study it, play it, or simply know it was real. That is the best possible outcome for a thing that was, not long ago, effectively lost. The engineers, the producers, the people who answer subscriber calls, they can know that what they built has been seen again. That seems worth something. If you remember the Cable Game Service, if you were one of the subscribers who loaded a game from a cable signal and found it genuinely astonishing, this archive is for you. And if you have no memory of it at all, that is exactly why the archivists went looking. Because the absence of a memory is not the absence of a thing. It is just a thing that has not yet been found. The library is open again. After 28 years in a box, the games are waiting. The signal is back. If this kind of quiet detective work interests you, There is a community doing exactly this for hundreds of different platforms and formats. Preservation archives are always looking for contributors, and the work is often less technical than it seems. Sometimes all that is required is knowing someone who kept a box and asking what is inside. The history of the digital world is still being written. Some of it is being written from tape. Do you remember something from the early internet that seems to have disappeared? A game, a website, a service, a platform, or is there something in the story of a cable game service that stayed with you? A particular detail, a particular question it left open. The digital archaeologists are listening. The past is not as gone as it seems. It just needs someone willing to go and look. Somewhere in a drawer that has not been opened in 30 years, history is still waiting to be heard. The disc looks ordinary, a square of black plastic 3.5 inches across, its metal shutter slightly stiff, the handwritten label faded but still legible. Inside it, encoded in patterns of magnetism far too small for human eyes, there may be a lecture, a letter, the working draft of a discovery that was never printed, the machine that can read it. The specific drive, the specific operating system, the specific software may no longer exist anywhere on Earth. Around the world, archives hold millions of floppy disks, magnetic tapes, zip drives, and optical formats that are rapidly becoming unreadable. Every year, the last machines capable of reading certain formats fail and are not replaced. Every year, technicians who spent their careers maintaining vintage hardware retire, taking decades of knowledge with them. And every year, a small and quiet community of specialists races to recover what can still be saved before the window closes entirely and permanently. The magnetic coating that holds the data is slowly shedding. Every red may now be the last red. The 20th century is the most extensively documented era in human history. Offices generated paper in quantities that filled entire warehouses. Scientists published, universities archived, libraries catalogued. And underneath all of this, in a layer that few institutions noticed becoming fragile until it already was, an enormous volume of material existed only in digital form. Encoded on media built to be read by machines that are no longer being made in formats that may no longer have any living documentation. What is at stake is not old software or forgotten entertainment. What is at stake is the correspondence of heads of state, the working papers of prize-winning scientists, the unpublished research of academics who assumed their digital files would outlive their careers, the personal diaries, creative drafts, and professional correspondence of an entire generation, written in formats that have since been abandoned on disks that may since have shed the coating that held the data in place. In libraries, universities, and national archives, collections of donated digital media sit in storage, catalogued by label unread. Their contents are unknown. Their condition is undocumented. The volume of unprocessed material runs into the millions of individual items. The number of institutions actively engaged in recovering it is small. The number of specialists who know how to do the work is smaller still. And the media continues to degrade every day while that imbalance persists. Donated box arrives. Inside, among papers and photographs, a bag of floppy disks with handwritten labels. At a major research library, a multi-year project has been quietly working through thousands of floppy disks donated by researchers, writers, and public figures. The project combines traditional archival work, cataloguing, provenance research, access management, with the technical task of reading the disks at all. For each disk, the first question is whether the physical medium has survived well enough to be read. The second is whether the format can be decoded into something a modern researcher can actually open and use. Among the most significant finds were floppy disks belonging to a world-famous theoretical physicist, recovered as part of a larger donation of papers from his office. No one at first knew what to expect. When the recovery team managed to read the first disk, they found lecture notes and working drafts formatted in a word processing system designed for scientific notation. A system that had been discontinued. a system that nothing on a modern computer could natively open or render. In another collection, disks belonging to a senior government official held decades of personal correspondence that historians had never been able to access. Elsewhere, a poet's entire digital archive, working drafts that no one knew existed, emerged from a box of disks donated to a museum, still readable, barely. These discoveries have a quality that archivists describe as quietly astonishing. The material was always there. What was missing was simply the means to reach it. A magnetic tape machine sits motionless in a storage room. No one alive knows its precise encoding format. The problem is not just the physical disk. A floppy stores data in a format determined by the operating system that wrote it. There are hundreds of such formats, and they are not interchangeable. Each requires different software to read, different hardware to interface with, and often documentation that was never properly archived and may no longer exist at all. Many of these formats are understood today by no more than a handful of specialists anywhere in the world. And it is not only floppy disks. Magnetic tape was the primary backup medium for institutions throughout this same era. Tape formats are even more varied and even more dependent on specific hardware. Many archives hold thousands of tape reels, labelled, catalogued, and entirely out of reach. The labels say what is inside. The machines that could open them are museum pieces. The documentation for those machines exists in binders that may themselves have been discarded decades ago. In the Netherlands, a research team recovered data tapes from the country's first web development and hosting company, a firm that created websites throughout the 1990s for institutions and businesses. The tapes held not just the files themselves, but something rarer, the digital DNA of the early internet as it was actually built. Original source code, original layouts, working files of a moment that never expected and never prepared to be studied as history. A zip drive and a stack of zip disks sit on a shelf untouched, quietly becoming unreadable. The early internet is an extraordinarily fragile archive. Websites from the 1990s and early 2000s were built on servers that have long since been decommissioned in formats that browsers can no longer render. Those that were not captured by automated web crawlers, and most were not, simply vanished when the server was switched off. The tapes and disks made as backups during this era represent, in many cases, the only surviving record of what once existed at those addresses. A generation of artists, writers and musicians made their work in digital form for the first time during this period, saving it to media that is now unreadable. Graphic designers whose entire professional archive exists on formats with no surviving reader. Composers whose scores and studio sessions sit on formats no studio still has the hardware to play. An entire layer of cultural production, personal, professional, irreplaceable, is quietly expiring with each passing year. The scale of the problem becomes very real when considered at the level of individual people. A novelist who wrote all her drafts in a proprietary format on hardware she no longer owns. A scientist who kept his working notes in a database that ran only on a discontinued operating system. A filmmaker whose early edited work exists only on proprietary media for a system that has since been discontinued. Each would recognise the label on the disc. None can show anyone else what is inside it. A row of archive boxes stretches out of sight, each one labelled in a different handwriting, a different decade. In workshops and university libraries, in small preservation organisations and individual private collections, a community of archivists and technologists has formed around the problem. They are not a well-funded army, they are mostly small teams, sometimes single individuals, working with budgets that barely cover the cost of the equipment. What they share is a sense of urgency and a technical fluency that spans decades of computing history, from the earliest personal computers through to the last generation of optical disc formats. Materials arrive as part of larger donations, a box of papers, a filing cabinet, a storage unit, and somewhere inside, a bag of floppy disks. The disks are usually undated. They are labelled in ways that make sense only to whoever wrote the label. They have often been stored in conditions that were not ideal. Too warm, too humid, occasionally near magnetic fields that have partially erased what they were meant to protect. The recovery team receives them and begins carefully to assess. Provenance is one of the most important and most difficult problems in this work. A disk labelled in someone's handwriting tells you little about what software created the files on it, what operating system those files were written in, or whether the disk has been written to more than once. Often the only way to determine provenance is to successfully read the disk, which requires first having a working hypothesis about the format. It is a puzzle that requires solving itself. A cardboard box sits on an archival intake desk, the flaps open, rows of floppy disks visible inside. Beyond research institutions, the problem extends to individual estates, to the personal papers of people who kept meticulous digital records and whose families discover after their passing that the records cannot be opened. The files exist. The hardware to access them does not, and the expertise needed to recover the files without destroying them must be sought out, sometimes across countries, at costs that make recovery impractical for families without institutional support, significant resources, or prior knowledge of where to turn. No one has ever fully inventoried the scale of the problem, as no comprehensive survey has ever been undertaken. Libraries and universities know what physical media they hold, but not always what formats those media use, what operating systems created them, or how much of the data is still physically readable. The estimates specialists use are not percentages. They are simply more than anyone has the capacity to recover at the current pace of investment and awareness. A reliable total has never been produced. What makes this problem different from other forms of archival loss is its invisibility. A flooded archive shows visible damage. A burned library leaves visible absence. But a drawer of floppy disks that have passed the point of readability looks identical to a drawer of disks that are fully intact. The damage is below the surface, invisible to any inspection that does not involve actually attempting to read the disk, an attempt that may itself cause additional damage. The moment that archivists find most uncomfortable to describe is the moment they identify a disk that should contain something important, attempt to read it, and find that the coating is shed too far. The file names are sometimes still readable from the directory. The operating system's index of what the disk was supposed to contain. The files themselves, though, are gone, not lost somewhere that careful searching might locate. Gone in the most complete sense of the word. The disk is slid carefully into the imaging device. The head descends. The machine begins to listen. The first step in any recovery session is a physical assessment of the disk. A floppy stores data in a magnetic coating on a thin plastic substrate. Over decades, that coating can delaminate, shed particles, or become brittle. The lubricant protecting the surface from the read head also degrades. Some disks, if simply inserted into a standard drive, will shed coating so rapidly that the data is destroyed within the first seconds of contact. The physical assessment determines whether it is safe to proceed at all. The primary specialist tool for disk recovery is a controller device that connects a floppy drive to a modern computer and reads the raw magnetic flux transitions on the disk surface, rather than interpreting data according to any assumed format. This approach captures everything, including data in formats that no existing software can currently decode. The raw magnetic image is preserved first, and all decoding work is done afterward on a copy, with no further risk to the original medium. The disk surface shimmers under magnification. Each magnetic variation holds a binary choice, still readable or lost. Reading at the magnetic flux level goes below the level at which file systems operate. A standard drive interprets the magnetic surface and returns data according to the format it expects. A flux level reader does not interpret at all. It records the raw waveform of the disk surface as it passes the read head. This produces a format-agnostic image that can be decoded against any number of format specifications, tried one at a time, until the data resolves. The imaging hardware is only half the problem. The physical drive mechanism must be compatible with the specific disk. An 8-inch disk requires an 8-inch drive. A 5.25-inch disk requires a 5.25-inch drive. These drives are no longer manufactured anywhere in the world. Recovery specialists maintain collections of vintage hardware in various states of repair. And when a drive fails during a session, finding a compatible replacement can take weeks or longer, or sometimes never. One critical constraint during any recovery session is write blocking. The imaging process must never alter the original disk in any way. Never update its directory, never record the time of access, never leave any trace of having been read. Modern operating systems write to storage media automatically when a drive is connected. Specialists use hardware write blockers, small physical devices installed between the drive and the computer, specifically to prevent any unintended write operation. Under ultraviolet light, the damage map becomes visible. Lost areas of coating glow differently from areas that still hold data. Many disks cannot be recovered completely. The magnetic coating has degraded in specific areas. Patches where the data is simply gone. What the recovery team receives in these cases is a partial disk image with unreadable sectors scattered through the data. The work then becomes a form of digital reconstruction, using file system analysis to determine which files are intact and which are fragmented, and attempting to reconstruct missing pieces from adjacent data or from secondary copies that may have been made on other media. Once a clean image has been obtained, the next challenge is format identification. Disk formats are not always documented. Some are proprietary. Created by companies that no longer exist, never published in any technical standard, understood today only by communities of enthusiasts who have reverse engineered them over years. The specialist must identify the file system, the sector layout, the encoding method, and the application format of each recovered file. And for each of these, there may be no written guide whatsoever. The retrocomputing community, hobbyists who maintain and operate vintage computing hardware for personal interest, has become an essential partner in professional digital preservation. Enthusiasts have documented hundreds of obscure disk formats, built open source tools for reading them, and maintain collections of vintage hardware no longer held by any formal institution. Without this informal network of volunteers, many formats would already be permanently out of reach, with no remaining expertise anywhere capable of decoding them. The machine boots. Text fills the screen that no one has read in a very long time. When the data finally resolves, when the format is identified and the files are extracted, the moment is described as quietly affecting. A document opens that was written 30 or 40 years ago on a machine that no longer exists by someone who had no expectation that anyone would ever need to recover it. The content appears exactly as it was left. In some cases, the cursor is still positioned where the author was working on the very last day they saved the file. But recovery is only the first step. Reading data from a disk does not automatically make it usable. A document written in a proprietary word processor from 1988 may open as garbled text, or as a file that nothing modern can pass. The software that created it may have been abandoned or discontinued. Specialists must sometimes install operating system emulators and long-abandoned applications just to render the contents of a recovered file in a form that a researcher can actually read. In one documented case, recovered lecture files from a famous physicist were formatted in a specialized word processing system designed for scientific notation, a system whose developer had long since ceased to exist. Rendering the files required locating an original copy of the discontinued software, finding a machine capable of running it, and extracting the content page by page. Each lecture was complete and intact. The voice it contained had been sealed inside a dying format for more than 20 years, unread by any researcher. Recovered files are printed and compared against a second disc from the same collection. Every line agrees. Different institutions have developed different approaches to this work. Some focus on creating bit-level images of every disc in their collection before attempting to decode any. a triage strategy designed to preserve what can be preserved before further degradation occurs. Others work through collections systematically, from the most physically fragile media to the most stable. A small number of specialists have developed deep expertise in a single format, offering that expertise to institutions around the world on a case-by-case basis. The imaging first strategy has particular appeal for collections of unknown condition, where the format distribution and physical damage are not yet known. By imaging everything first, creating a permanent archival snapshot before any media is handled further. The team ensures that any subsequent damage affects only copies, not originals. The original discs, once imaged, can be placed in controlled storage and not disturbed again. Hard drive archaeology is a newer and even more specialised discipline. When a hard drive fails mechanically, when the read arm crashes against the platter surface or the actuator motor seizes, the data on the platters may still exist, intact but unreachable. Specialists working in controlled environments can disassemble the drive, move the platters into a donor chassis with functioning mechanics, and attempt a partial read before the exposed platters are damaged by the environment or by handling. At the furthest extreme of recovery work lie techniques used when conventional mechanical reading is no longer possible. Magnetic force microscopy, a method developed originally for materials science, can scan a disk surface at nanoscale resolution, mapping the magnetic domains that hold the data without any physical contact between probe and surface. This approach is slow and expensive, but it can read disks too damaged for any mechanical drive and can sometimes recover data from platters that have been partially overwritten. Inside a clean room, the drive's cover is removed and the platters exposed to air for the very first time. The cost of specialist data recovery presents a serious ethical problem for the field. A single hard drive recovery, depending on the complexity of the failure, can cost as much as the annual acquisition budget of a small archive. This creates a hierarchy of what gets saved. Material from well-funded institutions, from famous individuals, from commercially valuable collections. The personal papers of an unknown researcher, the creative work of an artist without institutional backing, are far less likely to ever be recovered. There is a recursive dimension to this problem that specialists find quietly troubling. The tools used for disk recovery are themselves subject to the same forces that threaten the disks. Specialist imaging controllers are manufactured in small quantities and their availability is not guaranteed. The software used to decode obscure formats is maintained by volunteers who may at any time lose interest, change careers, or simply run out of time. The expertise lies in a small number of people who are, like everyone, eventually mortal. A corridor of archive shelving stretches into dim distance, every shelf filled with storage boxes. The end is not visible. The scale of the unrecovered archive is impossible to estimate precisely, because no comprehensive inventory has ever been undertaken. Institutions know what physical media they hold, but not always what formats those media use, what operating systems created them, or how much of the data is still readable. The figure specialists return to most often is not a percentage. It is simply, more than anyone has the capacity to recover at the current pace of institutional investment and awareness. The rate of loss is accelerating, not slowing. Magnetic media degrades on a curve, slowly at first, then suddenly. A disk that was readable last year may not be readable next year and may not be readable at all by the year after. Specialists trained in the hardware of the 1980s and 1990s are retiring. The market for vintage drives is shrinking. The window for recovering certain formats is now measurable in years, not decades. And for some formats, that window is already closed. The problem does not end with floppy disks. Every storage format is eventually succeeded by another, and every transition produces a new generation of orphan media. Writable compact disks from the early 2000s are now in transition. The die layers of many disks are degrading, and drives are becoming scarce. The optical disks burned across the 2000s and 2010s face similar questions. Even solid-state flash storage has failure modes over long time horizons that are poorly understood and rarely planned for. The The disk surface shows the bronze ring pattern of optical degradation, a format quietly passing its readable limit. A particular anxiety concerns material created entirely in digital form and never printed, never physically copied. A photograph taken on a phone in 2010 and stored only on a hard drive that has since failed is, in principle, gone. A film shot digitally and stored on a proprietary system that was discontinued is, if the files were never migrated, unrecoverable. The same applies to emails, institutional databases, early social media archives, and entire categories of governmental record that exist now only in formats that are already being deprecated. Professional recovery involves not just technical expertise, but a form of historical reconstruction, an ability to determine, from partial evidence, the technical environment in which the data was created, what operating system version was running, what was the default sector size for that format at that time, what known bugs affected the file system on that revision of the software. Each question must be answered correctly in the right order before the data has any chance of resolving into readable files. No shortcut through this process exists. Against this backdrop, the open source and community-based approach to digital preservation represents something quietly remarkable. Tools for reading obscure disk formats, software emulators for obsolete operating systems, databases of format documentation, networks of enthusiasts willing to donate time and hardware. All of this exists outside any institutional budget, maintained by people who feel a genuine responsibility to a heritage they see slipping away. Their work does not make headlines, but for many formats, it is the only reason the data can still be read at all. The material that has been recovered has, where it has reached researchers, already produced historical discoveries that would not otherwise have been possible. Letters that historians did not know existed have clarified timelines and contradicted received accounts. Working drafts have shown how major ideas develop through stages that the finished published work entirely conceals. Scientific notes have revealed abandoned lines of research that might, with new knowledge, be worth revisiting. The past that seems settled turns out in these moments to still be arriving. A monitor fills with streaming text as a vintage drive connects successfully. Each line of output is another file recovered. Archivists who have thought carefully about the long term tend to arrive at the same conclusion, that the recovery window for the most at-risk formats is likely shorter than the time available to address it at the current pace of investment. What would be required is a coordinated, well-resourced international effort, something that has been proposed and discussed many times and never yet fully built. The material exists, the tools exist, the people exist. What has not yet existed is the collective will to treat it as urgent. The contrast with physical media is stark. A letter written on acid-free paper and stored in cool, dry conditions can remain readable for centuries without any special hardware, without any software, without anyone needing to understand the format. A floppy disk stored in the same conditions, holding 1,000 times more information, requires a functioning drive, a compatible operating system, and application software that may not have existed in any maintained form for decades. The digital revolution promised permanence. What it delivered, in many cases, was extreme fragility. There is a philosophical dimension to this that archivists sometimes articulate and sometimes simply feel. The people whose lives and work are stored on these disks recorded their thoughts in a medium that felt modern, reliable and lasting. They could not have anticipated that the format would become unreadable before their deaths, or that their digital files would prove less durable than a handwritten notebook in a drawer. The gap between what was intended and what has occurred is quietly immense. Institutions that have thought carefully about this are increasingly moving toward migration strategies that treat every digital format as temporary. Data is stored in multiple formats simultaneously, current formats for accessibility, open standard formats for long-term viability. It is migrated proactively on a schedule before formats become unsupported rather than after. Hardware and software dependencies are documented in detail and treated as part of the archive itself, rather than as external infrastructure that someone else is responsible for knowing about and maintaining. The drawer is pulled open again. Inside, a disc that has never been imaged. There is still time to try. The specialists who do this work describe themselves as neither nostalgic nor pessimistic. They are pragmatic about what can still be saved and honest about what cannot. They know that some of the material in the collections they work through will not be recovered, that the coating will have shed too far, or the format will prove undocumented, or the hardware will fail before the session is complete. They do the work anyway, because the alternative is to stop, and they find they cannot do that. Every generation creates more digital material than the one before it. Every generation also inherits the format problems of its predecessor. The discs now being painstakingly recovered in libraries and workshops across the world were once the leading edge of how knowledge was stored. They were the future. What will future archivists think of the storage formats of this present moment? The cloud services, the proprietary platforms, the subscription software, and what will be required to recover what has been placed inside them? The drawer is gently closed. What is inside is still there. Whether it can still be read is another question. Somewhere in northern Germany, a teenager pressed record. He did not know what he was starting. It was sometime in the early 1980s. German radio stations played music late into the night, mixing well-known artists with regional acts, local recordings, and unknown bands that would never make it further than a local club. A teenager sat in his bedroom with a cassette recorder running, capturing whatever he liked the sound of. He cut out the DJ voices deliberately, leaving only the music. He wanted clean recordings. He did not always catch the names, but he knew what moved him. One song in particular was different from the others. It had a moody, melancholic quality, a restless energy, like music recorded in a city that does not quite trust the morning. The singer's voice carried an accent the teenager could not quite place. The instruments layered carefully, almost carefully enough. The recording lasted around 3 minutes. He had no idea who made it. He wrote a question mark on the cassette case next to it and moved on. The cassette went into a drawer. Question mark stayed, and the song slept for more than 20 years. The 1980s gave way to the 90s and then to the 2000s. The teenager grew into an adult. He moved away from the coastal city where he had grown up. The cassette travelled with him in a box, the way small objects from childhood do. It was not important. It was not even musical to him anymore. It was just a tape he had kept. The question mark on the label had faded. The music inside had not. The magnetic tape inside the cassette was aging. All magnetic tape does. The iron oxide particles that hold a sound recording begin to shed over time, a process so quiet it is invisible until it is too late. The music captured on that cassette was decaying at the molecular level, one microscopic flake at a time. No one was listening, no one was preserving it, no one even knew it mattered yet. His sister was curious about the old tapes. She had grown up in the same house, heard some of the same music. There was something compelling about recovering old recordings. Not just the sound, but the act of finding something that had almost been lost. She spent time with a cassette player and a computer, converting analog waves into digital files, one tape at a time. The process is painstaking. Magnetic tape is fragile. She did not want to lose whatever was left. When she reached the tape with the question mark, she listened again. The sound quality was rough. There was the hiss of analog recording, the subtle warping of old tape, a slight mechanical flutter in the playback. But the song was still there, still moody, still unidentified. She typed a few words into an online forum. "Does anyone know this song?" and attached the audio. She did not expect much, she just wanted to know. The year was 2007. The internet was already large. Video sites, music databases, forums for every possible interest. If a song had ever been professionally released, someone online would know it. The tools for identifying music were still primitive by later standards, but the human knowledge base was enormous. The right person, given the right audio clip, could identify almost anything. Could identify it, that is, unless the song had never been widely released at all. The initial responses to the forum post were well-intentioned but unhelpful. Guesses came in, names of known new wave artists, suggestions of similar sounding tracks. None of them matched. Professional music databases had no record of it. Audio fingerprinting tools came back empty. The song existed outside every catalogue, every register, every database. It was in the audio file she had uploaded. It was nowhere else on the accessible internet. The silence from official sources was total. What remained was the song itself. Roughly 3 minutes of unnamed music from an unnamed band recorded off a German radio station that no longer kept archives of that era. The original broadcaster had no searchable record for those years. The DJ who had played it was untraceable. The band that performed it had left no digital footprint. The internet knew nothing. And for a while the search quietly stalled. But the post stayed up, and in the strange, patient way of online communities, it occasionally attracted fresh attention. Someone new would stumble across it and try again. A music historian would listen and offer a careful guess. A linguist would note something about the singer's accent. Nothing led anywhere conclusive. The song became a small, persistent open question. Not famous, not solved, not forgotten. Just waiting. The audio file circulated slowly through music forums. Each new listener heard the same mystery the original poster had. Online music communities had been solving mysteries like this for years. Someone would share a half-remembered melody from a film, a jingle from a television show, a snippet of something their parent used to play. The collective intelligence of thousands of music lovers was remarkable. They had identified songs from a few hummed bars. They had traced recordings to regional radio stations in countries most people never thought about. This was difficult. But difficult was not impossible. The tools available to the early searchers were limited. Music recognition software of that era was built on commercial catalogues. It matched what was in a database and returned nothing when no match existed. The song had never been commercially released in any form that entered a catalogue. No label, no distributor, no digital storefronts. The song predated the era when small regional bands routinely released music independently. It had simply been played on radio, then vanished. Researchers who listened carefully noted several characteristics. The song appeared to be from the early to mid-1980s, based on the production style and instrumentation. The synthesizer textures and guitar tone pointed toward new wave or post-punk. The singer's accent suggested German origins but was not definitively placeable. The lyrics, partially audible, contained a phrase some interpreted as a place name. These were leads. None of them went anywhere. The search flickered. Interest rose and fell across the years like a signal drifting in and out of range. For roughly 12 years, the mystery bubbled along at a low frequency. Occasional posts, occasional new guesses, occasional dead ends. The audio file migrated from platform to platform as the internet itself changed. The forums of 2007 looked different from the platforms of 2015, but the song remained the same, and so did the question attached to it. No one could say who had made it, or why it had vanished so completely. By 2019, the internet had changed profoundly. Individual forums and music newsgroups had given way to large aggregated communities where millions of users could encounter the same content simultaneously. A post that might have received 200 responses in 2007 could reach 200,000 people by 2019. Someone reposted the mystery audio to one of these large communities. Within hours, it had attracted tens of thousands of listeners. The response was unlike anything the mystery had seen before. Users arrived from different backgrounds. Professional musicians, acoustic engineers, and historians of regional German culture. The song was analysed with tools that had not existed in 2007. Waveform visualizers, spectral analysis software, audio comparison engines. None of them found a match. But the community forming around the effort was enormous. A dedicated forum section was created specifically for the search. Within weeks, it had grown to tens of thousands of members. Ground rules emerged organically. Do not post guesses without evidence. Search a band thoroughly before suggesting it. Document what has already been eliminated. The community had the discipline of a research team and the energy of people doing something they genuinely believed mattered. They called the song the most mysterious song on the internet, and the name stuck. Tens of thousands of bands had been checked and eliminated. The answer was somewhere in the silence between. The methodology grew more refined. Community members compiled lists of every new wave band active in Germany between 1980 and 1988. They cross-referenced these with regional festival records, radio archives, and music reviews from the era. When a band was identified as possible, a searcher would contact former members directly, writing to old addresses, sending messages to people who had not been in a band for 30 years. Most did not respond. Some said no. The acoustic analysis team was particularly systematic. They isolated individual instrument tracks and compared them against known recordings. The guitar style pointed toward a subset of German post-punk. The drum machine had a pattern suggesting a specific hardware sequencer from the mid-80s. The synthesizer patch was unusual. Not a preset, something programmed by someone with access to particular hardware. This was getting precise. But precise was not enough. False identifications were a recurring problem. Occasionally a community member would post what appeared to be a breakthrough. A band name, a song title, a recording that sounded unmistakably similar. The community would surge with excitement, then deflate when the comparison fell apart. The temptation to declare a solution is powerful when a mystery has lasted long enough. Each false answer left the community a little more cautious, a little more rigorous, and a little more determined. The singer's voice was one of the hardest elements to analyse. Voices are deeply individual, and the vocal on the mystery recording was partially obscured by the recording conditions. The cassette quality, the radio broadcast compression, the decades of magnetic decay. Linguists who listened could narrow the origin to a general region of northern Germany, but nothing more specific. The exact accent was somewhere between coastal northern German and something more neutral, as if the singer had been trained. 2020, 2021. The search continued through a lockdown world. There is something particular about a mystery that has already survived long enough to resist smart people with good tools. This mystery had done that. It had outlasted music identification software archivists, professional musicians, and acoustic engineers. Each failure did not diminish it. Each failure made it more compelling. By the time 2 years had passed since the surge in interest, the community was still there, still searching, still certain an answer existed. The community developed a kind of collective mythology around the song. Theories multiplied. Some believed it was not a professional recording at all, that it was a demo tape, something the band made in a living room, played on local radio once and never again. Others believed it had been released on a limited regional pressing, a cassette sold at a small venue, copies long since discarded. A few believed it had been deliberately kept secret, for reasons no one could articulate. There was also the question of the song itself. People listened not for analysis, but for the experience. Members wrote about what the song felt like, the texture of that synthesizer line, the way the voice hesitated before certain syllables, the sense of a melody trying to remember itself. The mystery had become inseparable from the music. You could not hear one without the other. Someone always came back. Someone always found a new angle, a new archive, a new thread to pull. In 2022, a researcher spent months contacting former employees of the relevant broadcasting station. Most could not remember specific songs from nearly 4 decades earlier. Some described how playlist records were kept, not carefully enough to be useful. One recalled that unsigned local acts were sometimes played without full documentation. This was consistent with what the community suspected, but it still did not identify the song. A parallel team focused on geography. The song was believed to originate in northern Germany. New wave bands in that region during the early 1980s had a particular circuit. The same venues, the same festivals, the same occasional radio opportunities. Someone mapped these circuits, building a picture of that local music scene. The research narrowed the search considerably, but the band was still not in any record they had found. By 2023, many in the community had accepted that the mystery might remain unresolved, not because they had given up, but because they were honest about what they had and had not found. Every band that fit the description had been checked. Every archive that could plausibly contain the relevant records had been contacted. The search had been thorough in a way that few internet efforts ever are, and still nothing. The answer would come, when it came, from a direction no one had thought to look. In late 2023, a researcher who had been following the mystery became interested in the community's geographic hypothesis. Northern Germany, early 1980s, new wave, small venues. He began searching not music databases but local newspaper archives, a digitised historical record of small-town cultural life, newspapers that had covered local concerts and events in those years. This was a different kind of research, slower, more patient. He found references to an event organised by the Northern German public broadcaster, a showcase for emerging regional acts. Local bands performed and the event was covered in local newspapers. In the column inches of small concert reviews, band names appeared that had never made it into any music database, acts so local they had left no other digital footprints. The researcher began going through each of them, one at a time. It was painstaking work of the kind that does not look impressive from the outside. Reading archived newspaper pages, cross-referencing names, looking for bands that fit the description in the mystery recording, the instrumentation, the error, the geography. Most names led nowhere. A few were identifiable but clearly wrong. And then one name appeared in a review from 1984. A small group from a coastal city. The review mentioned a keyboard player, a guitarist, and a singer with an unusual voice. He found a way to contact a former member of that group. The message he sent was simple. Do you still have any recordings from that time? The wait that followed was the kind of silence that can mean anything, and then a reply arrived. Yes. There were some old cassettes. Yes, there were recordings. One of them was a song with a title he had not heard in 40 years. The title was 3 words. The researcher read them and went very still. He compared the recording the former member sent against the mystery audio, the voice, the synthesizer line, the guitar tone, the drum machine pattern, the structure of the melody. He listened multiple times, carefully, the way the community had trained thousands of people to listen carefully. There was no reasonable doubt. This was the same song, the same performance, the same recording that a teenager in northern Germany had captured from a radio broadcast more than 40 years earlier. He knew. He had found it. On the 4th of November 2024, a single post appeared in the community. I found it. The community response was immediate and overwhelming. Hundreds of comments arrived within the first hour. People who had been searching for years, or 6 months, arrived at the same moment of collective recognition. There was verification to be done. But even before the rigorous analysis was complete, most people who listened knew. The particular certainty that comes from 17 years of careful listening was unmistakable. This was it. The verification process was careful and thorough. Community members with the deepest audio analysis expertise compared the original mystery recording against the version provided by the former band member. The waveforms aligned. The acoustic fingerprints matched. The specific characteristics that had puzzled the community. The synthesizer patch, the vocal phrasing, the drum machine timing, were all explained by the same recording session, the same band, in northern Germany in 1984. The news travelled faster than anything the community had seen before. The 17-year question had an answer. Major news outlets picked up the story within 24 hours. The mystery of the most mysterious song on the internet had been one of those recurring internet curiosities that journalists return to occasionally over the years. But now it had an ending, a resolution, a band name, a song title. The coverage was global. The story appeared in European outlets, American media, online publications in a dozen languages. Everyone wanted to know who the band was and what they had to say. Somewhere on the northern coast of Germany, a retired musician's phone began to ring. He did not understand why. The band had been 4 people in their early 20s when they recorded that song. By the time the internet found them, they were in their late 60s. They had not played music together professionally for decades. They had not known that a recording from 1984 had been heard by millions of people who could not name them. They had been famous in absentia, celebrated without knowledge. The song had travelled further without them than it ever had with them. One of the former band members gave an interview shortly after the identification was confirmed. He said the group was absolutely overwhelmed. They had not noticed any internet phenomenon. The song's title was not known online, so there was no way for them to trace it. He learned about it only when someone reached out directly. What the song had become while they were simply living their lives was difficult to absorb. The community that had formed around the search processed the resolution in complicated ways. There was enormous relief. There was satisfaction. The intellectual satisfaction of a question answered, a puzzle solved after the kind of effort that no single person could have managed alone. There was also something that resembled grief. The mystery had been the centre of the community's identity for years. Its resolution meant a kind of ending. The forum was still there, but the reason for it had changed. The question that had lasted 17 years closed in a single afternoon. The silence it left was enormous. The technical documentation of the solution was meticulous. The community published a detailed account of how the identification had been made and what had been confirmed by the former band members. Every claim was sourced. Every comparison was provided for independent review. The methodology that thousands of volunteers had refined over years of failed attempts had, in the end, worked exactly as it was supposed to. What remained was the question of the song itself. For 17 years it had existed only as a mystery, a degraded cassette recording of unknown origin. Now it had a name and a band. A family member located a cassette copy of the original broadcast recording, and a higher quality version was found in the lead singer's personal archives. The master tape was still missing, but there was enough to confirm what had been found. The band behind the mystery had formed in a coastal city in northern Germany in 1983. 4 young musicians who loved the sound coming out of Britain and continental Europe. Moody, electronic, slightly restless. They played local venues. They recorded a handful of songs. They performed at a regional festival organised by the local public broadcaster. One of those performances, or a recording from around that time, made it onto the radio. Someone taped it. That was enough. They played small stages in a coastal city. They did not know the radio was listening at all. The history of the band exists only in fragments now, a cassette with a few songs, a handful of newspaper reviews from small local publications, photographs from performances in the mid-80s that circulate in the online community as historical documents. The band members scattered after a few years, as most young bands do. Life rearranged itself around careers and families in the ordinary distances of time. Music was something they had done once when they were young. For 40 years, a cassette recorded in 1984 was just an old tape, a memory of something they had been, not pride or loss, just a fact. They had not kept track of it. They could not have imagined that tens of thousands of people were listening obsessively, analysing every second, trying to reach them across 4 decades of silence. The reaction of the former band members to the discovery was a mixture of emotions that is difficult to categorise. Overwhelmed, one of them said. Moved, in the way that unexpected recognition moves people who had not prepared for it. There was also a kind of disbelief. The strangeness of learning that a piece of your younger self had been travelling the world without you, accumulating listeners and meaning in your absence, for longer than most careers in music last. They had been unknown for 40 years. In a week, Millions learned their name. It did not feel real. Almost immediately, conversations began about what came next. A recording label expressed interest in formally releasing the song. The community that had spent years searching for the band now wanted to support them, to give the music a proper release, a proper credit, a proper place in the record. The idea of a vinyl pressing, a physical object that carried the band's name, was discussed. The formal release happened in the months following the identification. The original cassette recording, cleaned and remastered with care, was pressed onto vinyl by a small independent label. For the first time in 40 years, the song had a cover, had a catalogue number. It had a place in the physical and digital world where you could find it with just a name. The community that had created the demand watched the release with the quiet satisfaction of having made something happen. The re-release attracted attention far beyond the original community. Music journalists who had covered the search wrote about the resolution. Streaming catalogues that had never hosted the song added it. Listeners who had heard the mystery audio but had not been part of the search now encountered it with full context. A name, a band, a story, a 40-year journey from a cassette in a drawer to a vinyl pressing with proper credits and a place in the permanent record. In June of 2025, the band performed live for the first time in 4 decades. The performance took place in the region where the band had originally formed. The members who were available gathered on a small stage. Songs that had existed only on degraded cassette tape were played again, live, by the people who had written them. The community that had found them watched online and in person. It was not a large event by any commercial measure, but by almost any other measure, it was remarkable. 4 musicians playing songs they had written when they were young. The mystery had become a reunion. The community had become, in a very real sense, the reason a band existed again after 4 decades. This is not the normal relationship between listeners and musicians. Normally listeners come to music that already exists. Here a community had searched for music until they found both the recording and the people behind it, then collectively made the case for why it mattered. The musicians had been waiting without knowing they were waiting. There is a larger story here that this mystery illuminates. Every decade of recorded music contains countless recordings that were made but never properly archived. Regional acts, demo tapes, one-time radio performances by bands that dissolved before they had a chance to become historical. These recordings exist somewhere, on old tapes in attics, on cassettes in drawers, on reels in storage rooms. Most of them will never be found. Most of them are already lost. The magnetic tape that captured the song in the 1980s was never designed for permanence. It was designed for convenience, for affordability, for the ability to record and replay. The music that ended up on that tape was incidental to its purpose. It was not archived. It was not preserved. It was simply captured by accident of enthusiasm, by a teenager who liked the sound of something playing on the radio and pressed record before the song ended. Digital networks changed what was possible for lost recordings. The same systems that made it easy to forget content also made it possible to recover it. A community of tens of thousands could do what no individual could. Systematically eliminating possibilities, building and sharing expertise, reaching across languages and borders, contacting people who had not thought about their old band in decades. The internet had both created the obscurity and resolved it. The community that formed around the search did not set out to become a research institution. It formed because people were genuinely curious. That curiosity accumulated over years into something with real scholarly rigour. Documentation standards, verification protocols, systematic methodology. When the answer came, it was accepted and rejected according to those standards, not just celebrated. The community had taught itself how to do this kind of work, because the work mattered enough to get right. In northern Germany, a cassette tape survived long enough to be heard. That turned out to be everything. The story of the most mysterious song on the internet is, at its centre, a story about survival. Most of what was recorded on cassette tape in the 1980s is now gone. The iron oxide has shed, the tapes have broken, the bands have been forgotten in ways that feel permanent. This particular song was almost gone. Saved, it was a teenager who pressed record and a sister who cared enough to digitize an old tape before it was too late. There are probably thousands of similar mysteries still waiting in drawers and attics across the world. Songs played once, recorded by accident, never identified. Artists who made something real whose work survived but who have no way of knowing it. The most mysterious song on the internet was one of the fortunate ones. Community that found it was patient, rigorous, and lucky enough to look in the right place. The song still plays. It plays in streaming catalogues now, properly credited, with a note that tells the story. It plays in the memory of everyone who spent any time searching for it. It plays for people who heard it as a mystery and now hear it differently. As a completed thing, a question with an answer. The music that was almost lost is not lost anymore. If you have listened this far, you have heard the full arc of a mystery that lasted nearly 2 decades and ended in a small coastal city in 2025. The internet's capacity for patience, when curiosity runs deep enough, is one of its most underappreciated qualities. If you have ever wondered what other songs are still waiting to be found that thought is worth carrying with you,